Okay, we're on the right mic, we're recording. It's been a while since we've done this. Well, you've done it before. You did it with the other Emily.
Yes.
I haven't done this in a while.
This is now the second episode back from summer break.
Yes. Oh, maybe we should do an intro. I'm really rusty. Hi, Internet. It's Emily SW.
Sam.
And we are coming at you with the Haunted Heart Society Dark Literature Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube, hit like, all that good stuff. Getting the plugging out of the way. Yeah, so I'm very excited about today's episode because we are talking about another Emily.
There's so many Emilys.
There are.
I have to do a little bit of explanation about this one, though.
Okay, should I tell them what it is, or are you going to explain it?
I'll explain it. During the summer, on our Instagram, did a series of polls. And each of those polls, our followers were asked to choose between typically two different poems. There were a couple different things that I did, but they were two different authors, and I tried to pick poems that were a similar topic or theme or that kind of went together, and people voted. But I did not tell anyone that we were actually conducting a bracket.
The bracket, yes. The bracket was very exciting.
So, maybe you noticed that some authors reappeared, while others did not.
Not everyone can make it past the initial round.
So it was supposed to be the romantics bracket. And I started doing it just because I thought it would be really funny. But then as we were actually getting along with it, I thought we should do the pod episode about whoever wins the bracket. But then you guys all voted for Percy Shelley. And Percy Shelley already has a dedicated pod episode, which was the reason I thought, well, let's do the pod episode. So we're going to talk about the runner-up instead.
Yes, she deserves her time in the sun. Emily Dickinson.
That's right. Overcame Edgar Allan Poe, Lord Byron. Lord Byron was knocked out in round 1.
Sorry, guy. Sorry, my guy. Sucks to suck.
You guys really liked Berger and his creepy German poems, which are great.
Yeah.
But when he got to like the semifinals, I was getting a little nervous because I was like, I'm running out of poems I can find translations of.
Yeah.
Then he got knocked out anyway. So the second place went to Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, I was very excited about that. And so we decided, since, if you'll remember the Percy Bish Shelley, I'm having a hard time talking. I'm gonna apologize right now for you editing this later. I'm flubbing. The Percy Shelley pod episode, we did it in kind of a different format for us, which was Sam sort of told the story of his life through his poems.
Genius idea, in my opinion.
Yes. And it was a lot of fun. So we were like, okay, well, let's do the same format, but this time I have the reins. The Emily researched another Emily. So, I have a spiritual connection. I also just like Emily Dickinson is just one of my favorite poets. And she always has been ever since I started reading poetry. But I've never really dived very deeply into her life before. So I'm very excited about this. If you haven't checked it out already, definitely listen to the Percy Shelley podcast, because he was the winner. So give that a listen after you're done with this one. His
life was also very dramatic.
Yeah, it was entertaining. We need a biopic of that.
It was tragic, but he did a lot in his 29 years.
You gotta give it to the Romantics. They knew how to live. Yeah, and also, if you want to be included in future polls and brackets and all the antics we get up to on the Instagram, be sure to give us a follow over there.
Yeah, I try to make it.
And there's, in addition to being able to vote in the polls, there's also, Sam's been doing a really good job curating informational posts on different topics. So give us a follow over there if you like what we do here. So, before we get into this, the meat and potatoes, what do you know about Emily Dickinson?
She's from Massachusetts.
Yep.
Because all the American romantics are from New England for some reason.
I have a theory about that, but continue.
She was a bit of a recluse.
You could say that, yeah.
She did not publish most of her poems during her lifetime.
Correct.
And that's about it.
Okay, perfect. So, good. We have a good on-ramp here for my outline. Now, and I will say I think the reason so many of the American romantics are from New England, first of all, you have to look at the time period. Emily Dickinson was born in 1830 and did most of her writing in the late 1850s and early 1860s, which in America, that was the American Civil War. So...
yeah, that was quite the time period.
I think the Northeast during that time period was a little bit more well off than perhaps more southern areas, especially near the end of the war. And also, there were more institutes for higher learning, I guess I should say, at the time in New England. That's just my theory. The American South during the Civil War was just not the place to be. But anyway, that's a little bit off topic. So, now before we get into the nitty-gritty here, I do just want to shout out, as I was doing my research, I got some books from the library. I happen to own a book that I referenced. But as I was looking online, I found some really good online resources, and I just wanted to talk about them real quick because I think this is so cool. There's emilydickinson.org and also archive.emilydickinson.org. So those are both the same website. One of them's the old version and one of them's the newer version. But it's just a bunch of scholars who are just so into Emily Dickinson, and they want people to learn about her and teach her in high schools and colleges, that they put a bunch of scholarly resources for free on a website. And I was also really enjoying it because if you go online, if you look at it, they're very like early 2000s websites, which I just find really fascinating. But so there are, first of all, you can find her entire library of work through these resources. There are also scholarly papers that you can read for free and like snippets of scholarly papers. There's an entire website called classroomelectric.org, which is associated with that website, which is a constellation of websites on Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, and 19th century American culture. There are original manuscripts, rare photographs, notebooks, scrapbooks, letters, and maps. There are also, like, lesson plans in here. Like, as I was looking for resources, there are whole lesson plans about Emily Dickinson and also, you know, Walt Whitman. But yeah, so if you're interested at all, I highly, highly recommend checking out those websites. They're completely free. And I just think it's really cool that a bunch of nerds, essentially, highly educated people were like, we're really passionate about this, and not enough people know about her and the truth about her. So we're going to put all this online for free. That's the reason the internet exists, and I just think it's really neat. I also really heavily reference them and use the resources, so I just wanted to shout them out real quick. Oh, and also, for biographical information, I pulled some of it from the books I have little bios of her in the beginning, and I also pulled it from the Emily Dickinson Museum, the official museum website. Her estate, the Dickinson estate, is like a museum now.
Oh, so we can go there.
Yes, we can.
We should.
We should. I 100% agree.
You know what we should do? We should do the New England tour.
Ooh, do Salem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good idea.
We know people in Salem.
We do. I know someone in Boston. So, yeah, so we're just going to get a little bit, we'll do some basic biographical info, and then get into my direction here. Emily Dickinson was born December 10th, 1830, and she died May 15th, 1886. So she was 56 when she died.
Okay.
She never married, and she was famous for being a recluse. So you're right on that one.
Yes.
She wasn't so closed off that she never saw people, but she very rarely left the estate. She would entertain guests. Her brother and sister-in-law built a house right next door to the family estate. So she would go over there sometimes and visit with them and the nieces and the nephews and stuff. Basically, after like 1865, she never left that sort of familiar area. She never traveled after that. So that's where that reputation comes from. There was a series of deaths when she was younger that kind of influenced her. Especially, she had a young cousin who died when Emily was... Sorry, I got really weirded out by saying my own name. I'm not talking about myself. But so Emily's cousin died when Emily was 14. And so that kind of started, she writes a lot about death and mortality, questions about that nature.
Which is why we're talking about her primarily.
Yes. So she wrote, honestly, she was prolific. She wrote over 1,000 poems. In addition to poems, she was also a prolific letter writer with select friends and family members. And she also, people call them letter poems because when she was writing these letters, even if they weren't all in verse, they had sort of a lyrical quality to them. So she was prolific, but while she was alive, only a handful of things were published. I think it was like around 10. And not only that, they were published anonymously. So none of them were ever attributed to her publicly. And she did not give permission for any of them to be published. So the way they got published was she would send them to friends or family, and they would submit them to publications. And that was how they got published.
Interesting.
Yeah, so not only was she not widely published, even when she was, nobody knew who wrote. No, the public didn't know, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Oh, I did make a note here. Her friends and family all joined the church, but she never did. I believe it was the Calvinist church.
Oh, that was my next question, was which one?
Yeah. Well, because I was from what I was reading, I believe it was the Calvinist church. And she writes a lot about faith and a Christian sort of idea of the afterlife and saints and all that stuff. But she was never officially part of the church. And she had her skepticism.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So by 1865, so Emily Dickinson was 35, she had written over 1,000 poems. And some of them got sent to friends and family in correspondence. But a lot of them, she herself bound together. Like, she made her own little collections that she never showed anyone. Nobody knew they existed until she died, and her younger sister was going through her things. But she made these little collections of her own poems that she curated. They're called facsimile. Basically, she was making her own little mini-zines.
She was ahead of the curve.
She was.
Except for the fact she didn't show it to anybody.
No. Yeah, so the people that she shared her poetry with, most notably, there's two that she shared the most with. So Susan was, initially Susan and Emily were best friends. They met in college, essentially. So they were BFFs. And then Susan married Emily's brother. That was the brother and the sister-in-law that built the estate right next to the Dickinson family estate. They were lifelong correspondences, and they shared writing with each other. So Susan also wrote, like, essays and stuff like that. She was also never published until later, I believe. And then also another key figure is Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who got about 100 poems, roughly. And the reason Emily started writing to him was he put out an article calling for people to write and publish their work. So she sent him a bunch of poems like, hey, can you tell me what you think? And then they began a friendship after that. They were pen pals, and they did meet in person for the first time in 1870. So those were the two kind of most prominent figures that got poetry in her life.
So then it wasn't that she never tried to get published.
Yes and no. It's like, there's also, I didn't delve super into this in my research, but she and Susan, when they were talking about this kind of thing, they made a very big distinction between being printed and being published. And so they talked a lot about what does it mean for poetry when you're getting paid by the word? Does that detract from the value of poetry? So I think, in a sense...
Okay, so they were talking about it in terms of artistic or being a commercial product.
Yes, well, and... There's also, because so much of her original handwritten manuscripts survived and have been archived, and that's one of the things you can go and look at. You can look at scanned copies of her original writings. The things that got published were often not, like, heavily edited, but they were edited by her original form was kind of lost when they did get published. So part of it was a censorship thing. This kind of goes along with what you were saying where she was ahead of the time with the zines. Mm-hmm. She was also a little bit ahead of the time with her style of poetry. When you read Emily Dickinson, her more popular works are kind of more traditional in form, but a lot of her work is very fragmented and it's a lot more modern in terms of it doesn't have a set structure all the time or a rhyme or a meter the way that classic poetry usually does. I wrote this quote down because, so Higginson, when she wrote to him, like, hey, can you tell me what you think of my poetry? He told her he thought her poetry was quote-unquote wayward and also quote-unquote uncontrolled. And he said, don't publish it.
Oof.
But she had a lot of support. Like, again, Susan, her sister-in-law, was a big supporter of her work. They would go back and forth editing poems. Some of her friends, like, she had supporters that really liked her work, but it was not kind of in vogue. It was not really publicly accessible. The public would not appreciate it, was the feeling of publishers at the time. Did that make sense?
I was just sitting here thinking about how fun it would be to have just like a poetry pen pal.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Very romantic. I mean, she is one of the romantics, so I guess it makes sense.
Yeah.
Scholars don't actually know exactly what happened. Some sort of event or something happened that sort of prompted Emily to become a recluse. So in an 1862 letter to, I believe it was to Higginson, she writes, I had a terror since September. I could tell to none. The cause of the terror is unknown. Well, the cause of the terror is unknown is not Emily's quote. Nobody actually knows what happened. Nobody knows if it was like a physical thing or if she had some sort of mental breakdown or what happened. But something happened that prompted her to not want to leave the house.
Just the terrors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, precisely. I couldn't find a lot of concrete theories about this. It definitely wasn't any sort of like, oh, an important person died or anything like that, because we would have records of that.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody actually knows because she never specified. It's just a terror. And obviously she writes poems. Some of her poems are darker. They deal with, again, themes of death and mortality and things of that nature. But nobody knows. And so later in her life, so she was the most prolific. She did most of her writing between 1858 and 1865. Almost exactly corresponds with the American Civil War.
She started a couple years earlier.
Yeah. And she wrote throughout her entire life, but much less frequently. Also much in a less finished manner, I guess. Like, she had more drafts than finished poems. After a series of tragedies, so her father passes away, and then her mom has a stroke, and then later dies a few years later. And then her nephew passes away from typhoid. And that all happened between 1874 and 1883. Emily basically has a nervous breakdown. And then another close friend passes away in 1885. Emily gets diagnosed with nephritis. I looked that up. It's something to do with the kidneys.
Okay.
Her health just declines until she passes away in 1886. So that is just the bare bones contextual information. And now we're going to get into, I'm going to read one of the things that was actually published during her lifetime. Another thing to note, Emily did not title any of her poems. She very rarely titled poems. The ones that were published did get titles from whoever published them. So this was published under the title My Sabbath in the Round Table on the 12th of March, 1864. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home, with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long, so instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. That is one of her published works. So that has kind of a traditional, like a rhyme and a meter. And now one thing, if you do read her, you'll know she loves an M-dash. A lot of these were published during the Civil War, and some of them were published in like charity publications, to support the Union soldiers.
Yeah.
So that is a taste of one of her published poems.
In addition to the form, like the topic itself was pretty sterile.
Yes.
Everyone can get behind a poem about, it's a poem about not going to church, but it's kind of saying, I just live my life in a way that I don't need to go to church once a week, and that's the only time I'm a good person.
The world is my church because God made the world, right?
Yeah,
hello.
It's a little bit of criticism, I guess, in there of society, but generally it's a safe topic.
Yeah, it's a safe topic. It's pretty. Her most famous poem, at least from my point of view, is Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Have you read that one? It was part of the poetry series on the Instagram.
Yes. I'm pretty sure that was one of the ones that was used in the poll.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah. So that's one of her most famous. This was not published, so it does not have a title. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children played at wrestling in a ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice but a mound. Since then 'tis centuries, but each feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. And so this again, it's 5, I can count, neat little stanzas. It's got a pretty standard rhyme, pretty standard meter. It is
Except for when it doesn't.
Except when it doesn't, yeah.
Your brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that I'm pretty sure I covered this in 2 college classes. And I probably would have covered it in more if I had taken more poetry classes.
Given the choice.
Yeah. So this one is very widely talked about. And then another one.
What did they say about it?
The first college class I talked about it's mostly because it's a good way to get into close reading poetry in terms of deciphering the metaphor and what the language is saying, because in order to analyze a poem you have to go into it with a bit of a different sort of analysis than a novel, just because a poem is so short and the language is so specific. And sometimes, this one not so much, but sometimes in a poem you really gotta follow the metaphor along a couple twisty paths to get to what it means. But yeah, this one is pretty accessible. It's pretty metal. It's about death. You know, it's pretty cool. And this one, too, is also a good way to talk about rhyme and meter, which is, oh my god, don't even get me started on meter. And then I'm just going to read one more of her, what I, again, to my perception, these are the most famous poems. This one you've probably seen quoted out of context frickin' everywhere. Again, there's no title. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm, that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land, and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. That was a little more lighthearted, uplifting. I don't know about you, but hope is the thing with feathers. I feel like that gets quoted all over the place and referenced a lot. But yeah, again, pretty accessible, right? I mean, there are a lot of M dashes when you're looking at it. Pretty normal, rhyme, meter, very warm and fuzzy.
A little bit, yeah.
When I was making the script for this, or the plan, I guess I didn't really script it, she really liked gardening. Gardening was one of her main hobbies outside of writing. So she has a lot of really beautiful poetry about just nature, and it's delightful. So I thought about that, and I was like, oh, I could just, I could follow the typical, the classic Haunted Heart Society route, go with all the death and the more morbid, macabre poems. Then took a different route. Now I'm going to read a selection, and I'm not going to tell you why I chose them, but they're all connected somehow.
Uh-oh.
This is not a test. I just want to see if you're going to pick up what Emily and Emily are putting down. Okay. I am Emily Dickinson is speaking through... No, I'm not going to say that.
That's weird.
That's presumptuous. But I...
Well, now, see, it is a test, though.
Yeah, I guess it is. I thought it would be interesting. So, play along, audience. It's a game. It's not a test. It's a game.
Okay, here's the problem. You're talking to me.
Like a Capricorn.
And I take everything as a serious test, challenge, or you know what? This also may be the result of watching too much anime.
Oh.
Everything that I do, I have to prove. Can't just do things for fun. I have to be the best at it. Now I have to win at poems.
Okay. Well, there is no right or wrong way to play the game. For you playing at home, you won't be able to play this way. But for Sam, if you need me to repeat anything, this isn't Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Can't call a friend.
No, well, I don't know what friend you would call for help on this. I think the friend you would call is me.
Yeah, probably.
But I will give a little bit of context.
Okay.
This poem is from 1853. Ho, pilot, ho! Knowest thou the shore when no breakers roar, when the storm is o'er? In the peaceful west, many the sails at rest, the anchors fast. Thither I pilot thee, land ho, eternity, ashore at last. Again, not for the viewers at home, but here is a handwritten sample of the poem along with the text. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, well, the west is where the sun sets.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just another poem about the passage of life.
I am going to withhold any comments until we get...
Coupled with being a New Englander, on the ocean, whalers, ships are a big deal.
It's true. Okay, here's the next one. This one is from 1859. Her breast is fit for pearls, but I was not a diver. Her brow is fit for thrones, but I have not a crest. Her heart is fit for home. I, a sparrow, build there, sweet of twigs and twine, my perennial nest. I don't have a picture of the handwritten version of that to show you. This one we don't have a date for. Wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds, to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, the sea, might I but more tonight in thee.
Okay.
Second to last. Again, I don't have a year for this one. Her sweet weight on my heart a night had scarcely deigned to lie, when stirring for belief's delight my bride had slipped away. If 'twas a dream made solid, just the heaven to confirm, or if myself were dreamed of her, the power to presume, with him remain, who unto me gave even as to all, a fiction superseding faith, by so much as 'twas real.
Are these from letters again?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the last one for...
So I'm getting a lot of pining.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ding, ding, ding. Okay. This one's gonna give it away. You're correct. A specific kind of pining, and this is gonna tell you. To own a Susan of my own is of itself a bliss. Whatever realm I forfeit, Lord, continue me in I gotta read it again.
We're pining for Susan.
Yeah. Let me read it again. I butchered it. Because the moment you realized, I knew. You almost did a spit take. To own a Susan of my own is of itself a bliss. Whatever realm I forfeit, Lord, continue me in this. So the pining was for a certain Susan.
Yeah.
Who was originally Emily's BFFFFF.
And then became her sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm. And then they both lived next door to each other. And they were roommates.
They were neighbors.
Yeah. So that first poem that I read.
Ho, pilot, ho.
Ho, pilot, ho. So it's believed to be the first poem that Dickinson sent to Gilbert when they were both 23 years old. And you know what? You put on the rainbow lights.
Yeah.
And Sam just did that it'll be fun. Fitting.
Well, here's the thing. I did know this already.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I did.
That's fair. You didn't mention it.
I didn't because I didn't know exactly who she was writing about.
Ah, that makes sense.
But now I know. It was Susan.
It was Susan.
Her best friend's sister-in-law neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and now we're gonna get into it here, because during my research, because I had also kind of heard, I was like, wait a minute, aren't there theories that she was gay? Yeah. That was why she never married? So as I was looking into it, so I will say on the subject of the Emily Dickinson queer discourse, there's a widely misattributed quote that floats around the internet that is often attributed to Emily Dickinson, but she never wrote it. And the quote is something to do with, I licked the seal of the envelope to get a taste of you, or something. But Emily Dickinson did not write that. Somebody put that as a quote at the beginning of an article about Emily Dickinson potentially pining after Susan. But it was not something she wrote. So nobody mentioned that. It's not real. I mean, it is real, but Emily Dickinson didn't write it. So, her letters weren't that overtly gay.
Yeah. They
were, however, extremely subtextually gay, and some of it was overt. In particular, I would like to spotlight Wild Nights. So this is another one of the more widely known poems. And the reason I want to particularly spotlight Wild Nights is, so we don't actually know, this wasn't directly in a letter to Susan, so nobody really knows who the intended recipient is. And a lot of people like to say that it's, a male love interest, because a ship coming into harbor, that sort of visual metaphor, is a little phallic.
Oh.
It could be.
Okay.
That's what people say.
I would have never said that, but okay.
Well, that's the thing, because you're not a heteronormative scholar.
I don't look at every single thing and think of it as a sex metaphor.
Yeah, this one is kind of like the wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury.
Well, that was obvious.
Yes. But so a lot of heteronormative scholars, and in particular, but I actually discussed this poem in another poetry class. And we were talking about the metaphors and what could it mean, and there's a lot of theories that Emily Dickinson had some sort of unrequited love, or this, that, and the other thing, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, I know y'all are talking about, a man, but the metaphor here is a ship, and you want to know what pronouns we use to refer to ships?
Aha!
She.
That's right.
Feminine pronouns. And my professor literally was like, well, damn. You're right. I was like, damn right I'm right. But so this is a pattern with scholarship around Emily Dickinson. So she was, as we've discussed, she was largely unpublished during her lifetime. So let's talk a little bit about after her passing. And now for this, I have a 1970 Laurel Poetry collection of Emily Dickinson, and it has a handy little chronological timeline.
Neat.
And which was very good for just brief briefly checking things. So, let's see, she dies in 1886. The first volume of posthumous works were published in 1890, so 4 years after her death. A lot of the prevailing scholarship that basically was the canon until the 90s stemmed from these original publications. There were 3 volumes of poems that were published in the early 1890s. The letters of Emily Dickinson were also published in the early 1890s. The thing about these is they were very heavily edited. So, after Emily Dickinson dies in 1886, her younger sister, who I didn't really mention, but they were actually quite close, Lavinia, also great name.
That's a very of the time period name, too.
Yes. So she's going through her sister's things, and she's the one who discovers these little, like, hand-bound little zines. She had, I think, 13 of them, or she had a lot, as well as all of her just notes and manuscripts and scraps of paper. And actually, because Emily Dickinson kept everything she ever wrote, essentially, the way that scholars date her work, if it's not dated, is by her handwriting. Because as she got older and her health deteriorated, her handwriting got worse and worse and worse. So she goes from having really, neat sort of script. Scholars can roughly date her poems based on her handwriting because it was so markedly different. Then comes the task of, Lavinia and Susan want to get these published. And you want to know who they get to edit them?
Who?
Not Susan. We come to the villain of the story.
Uh-oh.
Mabel Loomis Todd.
That is a villainous name if I ever heard one.
You want to know what Mabel Loomis Todd's relation to Emily Dickinson was?
What?
She was her brother's mistress.
The scandal.
Yeah. So,
Wait, is this the same brother that's married to Susan?
Yes.
Okay. My next question is why is she editing the poems?
That's a good question. Honestly, well, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, so, when Emily Dickinson died, because she wasn't married, male in her life was her brother. She only had one brother, Austin.
Okay.
Her father was dead.
Mm-hmm.
Her mother was dead. She had no husband. Kind of responsibility fell on the only man, Austin. The poems and the letters to Susan were very heavily edited, so it did not seem as gay as it was. Which I think was also part of the reason why Mary Loomis Todd was the one editing them. Because Austin was probably like, I don't want any of this getting out.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. And so now I would like to shout out the Emily Dickinson Archive, because that's where I got a lot of this research. Also, shout out in particular to Martha Nell Smith and Rebecca Patterson, who were essentially paved the way for the Emily Dickinson was queer narrative. I mean, bisexual maybe. She did briefly have a, correspondence with a man who she talked about maybe marrying, but then he died. She never married. They never did it in person. It was only through letters.
These things do happen.
This is really cool. So because the kind of physical copies, the original versions of her correspondences were donated to, I don't know if they're at the Emily Dickinson Museum or if they're at, a college campus. That I don't remember.
You know what we're going to have to do? Go to the museum and find out.
Oh, hell yeah. Well, also, we can also just look at the scans online, but going to the museum is more fun. They sat, I believe it was Mary Nell Smith herself. Yes, it was. Because they had the originals, they were able to go through and look at it with microscopes and infrared, and they were able to see where things were either cut out. A lot of Emily's letters were on this really nice, linen stationery. Really nice paper. So Mary Loomis Todd would go in with
Mabel.
So, Mabel, sorry. The villain of the story. With a tiny little knife, and she would scrape off the top layer of the paper of whatever she was trying to cut out. So it's hard to see, but now with our current technology, you can go and you can really, enhance it, use the microscope. So Mary Nell Smith was able to go in there with this kind of technology and see where things were crossed out and, some of it she was able to, like, actually figure out what was originally there. Some of it we're not able to. In some of the poems and the censorship, the letters, whole, like, things were just taken out, and we don't know what they were.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
I figured it would just been, like, if they were submitting them for publication, they would have just copied them and took things out. Not actually going onto the original paper and scraping text off.
No, yeah, like, there were multiple ways that it was done. So some of them would take, like, cut another little piece of matching paper, put it over, and then, do whatever editing she wanted to. There's a couple of examples that Martha Nell Smith was able to actually, like, see what was edited. Yeah, so in the one I read that's her breast is fit for pearls, but I was not a diver, there's a footnote about Martha Nell Smith's, like, what she found. And so you can see here the rest of this is crossed out. So the rest of this line is actually just gone. There's something else that was supposed to be here.
Now, the chain of thought I'm having about this is, they wanted to publish the poems, and I'm sure they thought they were probably protecting Emily's reputation in this time period.
Yeah.
But also, Emily never intended for these poems to be published.
No.
So either way, it's kind of like a violation of her wishes. In addition to now, they've changed her words and changed the intention of these poems.
I was reading about this. This is, I believe it's just a part of a paper that Martha Nell Smith wrote on the subject, but it's available for free on the Emily Dickinson archive. And I do want to get my hands on the full version because it's fascinating. She's also savage. There's a couple lines in here where she goes after the male scholarship on the subject. But yeah, so, and obviously because, there is a little bit of debate, or there's room for debate, I guess you could say, about what exactly was removed or added or taken out. Like, some of the cases are more clear-cut than others. And now Martha Nell Smith says this: "We know enough about it to say that these changes were explicitly attempts to remove loving remarks about Susan Huntington Gilbert. The precision with which they were enacted is a tale all its own. Why erase only some letters, only some words?" So there's a lot of instances where, like, a she, the S was scraped away so it would become he. So a lot of feminine pronouns were masculinized. And this is not only the poems, but also her personal correspondences. So there's letters that Emily and her brother Austin exchanged. Because there was a period of time where he was away in New York before he and Susan moved back to Massachusetts. So there's just letters, just mundane, you'd think sibling crap, but some of them are erased. What was erased?
That is intriguing.
And a lot of it does appear to be, like, Susan's name in particular, and commentary about her is what was erased. And this line I enjoyed. "The revision imposed by another on Emily Dickinson simultaneously removes her name as addressee and gives Susan a beard, leaving ample evidence of its stridently imposed transvestitism. The illusion of a man haunts the letter just as a phantom man haunts the legacy of Emily Dickinson." Which, if you don't know, beard is slang for a straight passing relationship of two queer people. It was more, or I should say common, in previous decades when being openly gay was way more dangerous.
Yeah.
So a lesbian and a gay man would have a relationship together to avoid persecution while they were doing their own little gay thing elsewhere to protect each other.
Yeah.
And that's called a beard.
Okay.
In gay world. Here's a letter that both brother and sister have been wooing Susan, and after Austin has succeeded in pulling off a tryst with her in Boston, the word Susie here was edited by Mabel Loomis Todd to just say us. So, "Dear Austin, I am keen, but you are a good deal keener. I am something of a fox, but you are more of a hound. I guess we are very good friends, though, and I guess we both love us just as well as we can." But the original said, "And I guess we both love Susie just as well as we can." Right?
This is quite the family drama.
Right? Right? So here, Susie was recorded as being the center of a conflict between brother and sister. But then Mabel was like, nah. It's just a declaration of sibling affection. And so you can see these kinds of editing marks in all of the early letters, so the 1850s letters between Emily and Austin. Very gothic plot. Like, Emily Dickinson has a very gothic life.
You wouldn't think it at first glance. Too,
No.
Especially because most of what we know, I should say most of what probably the general public knows about her, is just that, she never married, she never left her house, and that was it.
Yeah, that was it. It was just she was a spinster. But as is often the case with history, they do like to erase queer people. So this was the original editing and censorship that was published in the original 1890s versions. And it was perpetuated by, Mabel's daughter, Millicent Todd Bingham,
Wow.
in the 40s and 50s. And then there was another editor, Thomas Johnson, in the 50s, and Ralph Franklin in the 60s. So they just kept perpetuating the ideas put forth in these censored versions because those were the original text, quote unquote, right? Mm-hmm. And they never examined them closer. So the erasures, cutaways, and blottings out have gone until the last decade, practically unremarked in critical study. This is an old paper, so this is referring to the 90s. For most critics and editors, these have not been worthy of critical examination. In fact, of particular interest for critical inquiry is that these elisions, both those that can be restored and those forever out of our grasp, have been and continue to be compulsively reenacted and recycled rather than rigorously examined in Dickinson studies. And now this is where Martha Nell Smith starts getting savage. She starts talking about a reviewer for the New York Review of Books who calls Susan's critical abilities into question. And he's preserving the image of the quote-unquote idiosyncratic genius, Emily Dickinson, the one unrequited love with a man, and that was why she was bitter and never married, and blah, blah, blah. And so this guy's like, Susan cannot possibly appreciate Emily's literary endeavors.
Rude.
And the way he backs this up in his writing by citing a time where Susan called Emily's poems simplistic and homely, which is from the obituary Susan wrote for Emily. And he leaves out the context where the whole sentence, Susan is praising Emily's poems not for their just simplicity and homeliness, but for their simplicity and homeliness as well as profundity. So the entire line is simplicity and homeliness as well as profundity. He just left that out, that Susan said they were profound.
You know what? This is a lot to be saying about a bunch of people who were just trying to live their lives.
It has no bearing. And at this point, they're both dead.
Yeah.
This was a recent New York Review of Books in, I'm guessing, the late 90s, early 2000s. Emily Dickinson and Susan Dickinson, Austen, they're all dead.
But you know what I mean? They're not they're politicians. It's not like Emily was making a living on her writing and she was an esteemed author during her lifetime.
Nope.
She wasn't, spearheading a literary movement.
Nope.
These are people just living their lives, and just because they happened to publish Emily's poems after she passed away. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not like they lived a public life where there's lots of material written about them from a lot of other people, so you could really try to get an insight of who they were. What we know about these people is actually limited to whatever letters are still extant.
Yes. Well, yeah, and there's certain cases where personal correspondences between friends of the Dickinsons, so because they did a lot of entertaining. There are letters from friends and family friends about both Susan and Emily that contradict some of the portrayals. Susan being a dumb woman.
Yeah, I just think when you're writing about, especially Susan, whose role in this was just being the BFF sister-in-law neighbor girlfriend.
Yeah.
That's just a very strong statement to be saying about somebody who, first of all, never asked for your judgment.
You can read Susan's published writings. They were also published. I don't remember if she died before they were published, but they were published when she was at least later in life, if not after her death. But yeah, and this is just a guy who literally, because you can find the obituary that Susan wrote for Emily is very easily accessible, and he just completely changed the meaning of it for his own purpose. And I would posit the reason for that is homophobia and misogyny.
I just think he's doing too much.
Yeah.
Why do you have an agenda against this lady?
Yeah, I don't know. But so So Martha Nell Smith is going off on this guy. By erasing as well as profundity from this line, he transports and distorts Susan's Emersonian appreciations, removing them from the realm of philosophy and tucking them with one imperiously sweeping critical gesture into the realm of greeting card. As did Loomis Todd, the mutilator of the last century, he leaves this like Poe's purloined letter out in the open for all to see, for he knows that so obvious, so apparent, so visible his erasure will very likely not be seen by most. Indeed, by most readers, the disfigurement of what Susan actually wrote has not been seen, though it is plainly visible. Yeah, she goes hard. I just love the mutilator of the last century about Loomis Todd. I was just like, get her, she's already dead, but get her.
This is just so much.
It was a widespread problem in the scholarship around Emily Dickinson. Basically, for the entirety of the 20th century, up until the 90s when people started being like, hey, wait a minute. The first biographer to consider Dickinson's homoeroticism was Rebecca Patterson. And she was essentially shunned, and anyone who tried to talk about that was just completely silenced, brushed under the rug. But yeah, so that is the conspiracy that I discovered while doing this research.
Well, I was not expecting a conspiracy.
No, and it's crazy because it essentially, although the originals were there and people could have gone and investigated them, nobody did until Martha Nell Smith went in there with like a microscope and infrared and all this other technology and was like, hey, wait a minute, that he used to be a she. And now this kind of goes into just censorship in general, which I think is unfortunately, a very current topic. More interesting to me than the suppression of the erotic is the suppression of evidence of mental compatriot intellect between two women, and I'm keenly interested in what appears to be a systematically articulated fear of the writer who is not isolato. Do we fear leaving that thraldom? And these questions extend to questions that go way beyond the world of Emily Dickinson and Dickinson studies. And so in this article she says, I'm interested in hearing from you how you think they may extend to questions now posed about digitizing American literary history. What are the redefinitions demanded by the knowledge now made visible? What do these signs of ambivalent responses to textual bodies tell us about literary studies, about the reconstitutions of literary histories? Might we propose what another of my co-editors, Marta Werner, calls a new subject of textual vulnerology, a science of textual wounds? How do we begin to remap the zones and definitions of discourses that have held in place assertions of objectivity and authority and that have bound our critical storytellings? Are distinguishing between scribal and authorial intention, or asking how they modify one another, useful places to begin? But yeah, Martha Nell Smith is my new hero. I'm now on a mission to discover the full versions of her works. She also has a paper called Rowing in Eden, rereading Emily Dickinson, and I was able to find, there's a free excerpt of it, and it's long. But yeah, I wasn't expecting the conspiracy. I went into this oh, I know, I can make it gay.
Well, yeah, I knew that there had been some poems that were written about another woman. I didn't know any details about what the poems were or who she was writing about, just that it was a theory that was floating around. But I just figured it's oh, well, these poems are a little queer, and then that was it. Yeah, no, they're, at the end of the day, it's not really any of our business. But all of their letters are, they're online. They're all scanned. You can go to the museum. You can get copies of them. You just have to be careful when you get a copy. You gotta look and see, is the edition you're reading from the Mabel Loomis Todd editing, or were they taken from Emily Dickinson's original reconstructed? Interesting. So. Yeah, that was way more, I guess, exciting. Yeah. I anticipated. But yeah, so essentially Emily Dickinson, a very gothic life, wrote some pretty gothic stuff. We actually didn't, because I went the gay route, I didn't cover those. Maybe we can talk about the other poems at another time. But yeah, let us know what you think. Did you know any of this? Because I fell down the rabbit hole. At least queer icon, bi, lesbian, label doesn't really matter. The point of the matter is, queer people have always existed, and will always exist. And it doesn't matter how much you try to censor it,
the truth will get out. Let's close on this poem. I think this will be a good ending.
Okay.
So this is a poem written in 1884 to Susan Gilbert from Emily Dickinson. Morning might come by accident. Sister, night comes by event. To believe the final line of the card would foreclose faith. Faith is doubt. Sister, show me eternity, and I will show you memory. Both in one package lain and lifted back again. Be Sue, while I am Emily. Be next what you have ever been. Infinity.